Everyone in Los Angeles knows about the San Andreas Fault. They teach it in schools. You can find it on bumper stickers. It runs the length of California, and the cultural mythology around it is so complete that most people in LA have mentally filed it away under something I should worry about, but probably won't. And there is a problem with that, because the fault that seismologists at the Southern California Earthquake Center describe as potentially the most destructive in the entire region is not the San Andreas. It does not run along the edge of the city. It runs directly beneath it, 4 miles below downtown Los Angeles, beneath USC, beneath Pasadena, beneath the apartment buildings and office towers and the dense residential neighborhoods that fill the Los Angeles basin from one end to the other. The US Geological Survey has run the scenarios on what happens when this fault ruptures. The number they arrived at is this: up to 18,000 people dead in a single event. More than 700,000 households without a home by the following morning. Economic damage exceeding $250 billion. And here is the thing about that number. It is not a worst-case outlier invented to alarm people. It is the upper bound of a probability model developed by more than 400 scientists across 50 research institutions. The average outcome in the model is 7,600 deaths. Every scenario in the range is a catastrophe. And there is something sitting at the center of this story that I want to mention now and return to before this video is over. Something the former director of the Southern California Earthquake Center said about what would happen to the high-rise buildings of downtown Los Angeles in a full rupture. That statement is, in my view, the single most important thing anyone has said about this fault in 20 years of studying it. We're going to get there. First, you need to understand what this fault is, why its location changes everything, and why the gap between what scientists know and what the city has done about it is wider than most people realize. The first thing to understand about the Puente Hills Fault is that it does not look like a fault. There is no crack in the ground, no ridge, no visible scar on the landscape of the kind that marks the San Andreas across hundreds of miles of California terrain. The Puente Hills Fault is what geologists call a blind thrust fault. It has no surface expression whatsoever. It sits entirely underground, locked inside the sedimentary basin beneath one of the most densely populated urban areas in the United States. Invisible from above, impossible to see without geophysical instruments. The common assumption among people who think about seismic risk in Los Angeles at all is that the danger comes from somewhere out there, out past the suburbs, out where the land buckles visibly and the geology is raw and obvious. The San Andreas runs through the Mojave Desert, through the Cajon Pass. When people picture the big one, they picture shaking that arrives from a direction, from a fault that is at least geographically separate from the city itself. That mental model is wrong for Puente Hills, and the wrongness of it is precisely what makes this fault so dangerous. The Puente Hills Fault was not even identified until 1999. A team of researchers from Harvard University found it through seismic imaging, looking at the structure of rock beneath the LA basin using geophysical instruments rather than anything observable at the surface. What they found was a thrust fault approximately 25 miles long, running at a downward angle from shallow crust into the earth. A fault that had already ruptured at least 4 times in the past 11,000 years, generating earthquakes with magnitudes estimated between 7.2 and 7.5. And a fault that, in 1999, had not been accounted for in the emergency planning, the building codes, or the public conversation about seismic risk in Los Angeles. The mechanics of a blind thrust fault are worth understanding because they change how shaking behaves compared to a strike-slip fault like the San Andreas. When a thrust fault ruptures, the ground above it does not simply shake horizontally. It can be lifted. Simulations developed by Southern California Earthquake Center researchers show that a full Puente Hills rupture could physically raise the surface of downtown Los Angeles by up to 2 meters in the span of seconds. The shaking would include both sharp, impulsive jolts and sustained rolling motions. Thomas Jordan, who served as director of the Southern California Earthquake Center at USC, described the potential duration at more than a minute of continuous major shaking. More than a minute of a magnitude 7.5 earthquake directly beneath a city of 4 million people. And in August of 2024, a magnitude 4.4 earthquake struck the Los Angeles area, and it was traced to the Puente Hills Fault system, felt from the LA basin all the way to San Diego. That is not a prediction. That is a reminder that the fault is not dormant. The second thing you need to understand is the number and why it tells a different story than any earthquake number you have heard before. The common assumption, reinforced by 50 years of disaster films, emergency preparedness literature, and news coverage, is that the most dangerous earthquake scenario for Los Angeles involves the San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas is capable of generating larger earthquakes in absolute magnitude, potentially 8.0 or higher on the southern section. That raw size is why it dominates public imagination. It is also precisely why the comparison to Puente Hills is so counterintuitive. Seismologist Dr. Lucy Jones, a researcher at Caltech and one of the most recognized voices in American earthquake science, described the mathematical reality in terms that are difficult to argue with. When modeling a magnitude 7.5 on the Puente Hills thrust, researchers arrive at 10 times as much damage as a magnitude 7.9 on the San Andreas. Not because the Puente Hills earthquake is more powerful, but because the fault sits beneath the oldest and most vulnerable neighborhoods in the city. The density of people and buildings directly above a Puente Hills rupture is fundamentally different from the distribution of people and buildings along the San Andreas corridor, which passes through less populated desert terrain on its approach to the Los Angeles metro area. The joint USGS and Southern California Earthquake Center research, published in the journal Earthquake Spectra, put the fatality range for a full Puente Hills rupture at 3,000 to 18,000 deaths, with an average of 7,600. The estimated displaced households range from 142,000 to more than 735,000. Estimated total damages exceed $250 billion. USGS researchers noted that losses would concentrate in Los Angeles County directly above the fault surface, and that the structures above the fault tend to be older and more vulnerable than the wood frame residential neighborhoods that bore the brunt of Northridge. The 1994 Northridge earthquake, which killed 57 people, injured more than 8,700 and caused $40 billion in damage, occurred on a different fault entirely and is still considered one of the most destructive urban earthquakes in American history. The Puente Hills scenario at the midpoint of the USGS probability model would be 10 times worse. The USGS has placed the probability of a magnitude 7.5 or greater earthquake occurring in the Los Angeles region across all active faults at 31% within the next 30 years. Almost 1 in 3. If you live in Los Angeles or know someone who does, sit with that number for a moment before we continue. If you genuinely value what this channel does, bringing localized threat data to the people who actually live in these places, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss updates as this story continues to develop. And drop a comment below. If you live in the Los Angeles area, tell us what neighborhood you're in and whether this is something people around you talk about. We read every regional report that comes in. Your local experience matters to this community. Now to the buildings. Because fault lines are geology, and geology is slow, buildings are where the fatality numbers are made. The Los Angeles Department of Building and Safety has identified approximately 13,500 soft-story apartment buildings under its mandatory seismic retrofit program. These are structures typically built before 1978, before seismic codes were updated to account for their structural weakness, with open ground floors used for parking or commercial space. The architecture creates a condition where the first floor is structurally softer than the floors above it. When lateral shaking hits, the ground floor fails first, and the upper stories descend directly onto it. This is called a soft-story collapse, and it is precisely the mechanism responsible for the majority of deaths in the Northridge earthquake. The city watched it happen in 1994 and began the legislative process of mandating retrofits in 2015. As of early 2024, approximately 76% of soft-story buildings under the ordinance had completed retrofit construction. That means roughly 3,200 buildings remain unretrofitted. Some are in permitting, some are in enforcement proceedings. Some have owners who have not responded to the city's compliance orders. The April 2026 deadline applies to Priority 2 buildings, the smaller residential structures under 16 units that house the majority of renters in older Los Angeles neighborhoods. Priority 1 buildings with 16 or more units were required to complete construction by April 2024. Beyond soft-story wood-frame structures, the city's retrofit ordinance also covers approximately 1,500 non-ductile concrete buildings, older structures built before 1977 whose reinforced concrete is brittle under seismic stress rather than ductile and flexible. These buildings have a documented history of complete catastrophic collapse in major earthquakes. The retrofit deadline for non-ductile concrete construction plans is 2028. The deadline for completed construction is 2042. That is 16 years from now. The Los Angeles Mandatory Retrofit Program is real. It is backed by ordinance. It has produced measurable, substantial progress. It is also racing against a geological process that does not observe deadlines. A 2018 study in the Journal of Geophysical Research, analyzing geodetic data across the Los Angeles basin, found that the Puente Hills Fault is currently locked and accumulating interseismic strain on its upper sections at a rate of 3 to 4 millimeters per year. That energy is not being dissipated in small events. It is building toward the kind of release that the geological record shows happening on this fault once every few thousand years. The last time it happened, Los Angeles did not exist. The question the seismic retrofit program is essentially a race against is this: will the buildings be ready before the fault is? Before we reach the final section of this video, there is one more thing the data shows that does not get enough attention. And it is about Los Angeles' relationship with quiet. Between roughly 2004 and 2024, Southern California entered an anomalously quiet seismic period. The region, which historically averages 10 to 12 sequences of magnitude 4.0 and above earthquakes per year going back to 1932, was averaging roughly 5 such sequences annually during those 2 decades. Seismologist Lucy Jones noted in 2024 that the 20-year average was markedly below the long-term baseline. Then, in the first 8 months of 2024 alone, the region recorded 13 sequences, returning to something close to historical norms. The August 2024 magnitude 4.4 earthquake, which struck directly on the Puente Hills Fault system, was part of that renewed activity. USGS supervisory research geologist Stephen DeLong, when asked about the uptick in 2024, was careful to clarify that it represented normal variability rather than a signal of elevated risk. The risk, he said, is the same as it has always been. That framing is important. It means the quiet of the previous 20 years was not safety. It was statistical variability on top of a baseline that has never changed. The Puente Hills Fault was locked and accumulating strain throughout that quiet period. It will continue to do so, regardless of how many or how few small earthquakes register on the monitors in the weeks and months ahead. Southern California has a 60% probability of a magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake in the next 30 years, according to USGS. It has a 31% probability of reaching magnitude 7.5. Those probabilities do not belong to any single fault, but only one fault runs directly beneath the city's downtown. Only one fault lies under the neighborhoods where the oldest and most vulnerable buildings are concentrated. Only one fault, if it ruptures fully, produces the scenario USGS researchers have modeled. 18,000 deaths, 750,000 displaced households, damage on a scale that would require years of recovery. I want to come back now to something I set aside at the start of this video. The statement I told you about before we got into the data. The thing the former director of the Southern California Earthquake Center said about what a full Puente Hills rupture would mean for the buildings of downtown Los Angeles. Thomas Jordan, who ran SCEC from 1991 to 2016 and built it into the primary federal research institution for Southern California seismic hazard, described the scenario in terms that most earthquake discussions avoid. Simulations of a full Puente Hills rupture, he said, show severe damage to buildings throughout the affected area. The shaking would last more than a minute, streets could collapse, and this is what he said, stated plainly, it is conceivable that some of the high-rise office towers in downtown Los Angeles would collapse. High-rise collapse. In the center of the second largest city in the United States. If that earthquake strikes on a Tuesday morning or a Wednesday afternoon, the occupant count in those towers is in the tens of thousands. The Puente Hills Fault runs directly beneath them. 4 miles of rock and sediment is all that separates the surface of downtown Los Angeles from a fault system that has released magnitude 7.2 to 7.5 earthquakes at least 4 times in recorded geological history. There is a version of this story that ends well. The retrofits are completed on schedule. The 2026 soft story deadline holds. The 2042 non-ductile concrete deadline is met. Engineering standards continue to improve, and the Puente Hills Fault, which ruptures roughly once every 3,000 years, does not rupture in the decades before the work is done. That version is possible. The geological record does not tell us when the next event will occur, only that it will. What the record does tell us is that the fault is there, that it is locked, that it is loaded, that the city above it contains buildings that would not survive a full rupture at their current state of reinforcement, and that the plan to address that, the mandatory retrofit program, the extended deadlines, the funding gaps, the compliance proceedings, is measured in decades on a fault whose timeline is measured in millennia. Every morning that Los Angeles wakes up intact is not evidence that the risk has passed. It is evidence that the accumulation continues. The fault beneath the city has been patient for a very long time. The question science cannot answer, the one that makes this different from almost every other story about earthquake preparedness, is how much longer that patience lasts. Nobody in Los Angeles can answer it, and almost nobody in Los Angeles is talking about it.